little bit to change that. And these pioneers are here to help share their stories. We're going to start with in-depth kind of introduction of ourselves and how we all got here, right? But I think, Stephanie, you had the idea maybe everyone could, maybe just, since we're such a small group, tell us your name and what brought you to this workshop, and then we'll introduce ourselves more. Can I pass this way?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. First, I thought you meant to go that way.
No, we're going to go last.
Okay, all right. My name is Hua, and I'm a board-certified behavior analyst. I've been, working in the field for autism rehab for like more than a decade now. It all starts with 15 years ago when my son was first diagnosed as autism, and again, I was heavily influenced and deeply involved, and also received a lot of help from the community. Unfortunately, not from my own ethnic background. So that's why the day that I decided to switch my career from a chemist to become a behavior analyst, and I was like, if even I can do one small thing to impact the community in the future, I talk loud. I mean, not
recording.
Even I could do one small thing to show people, to bring inspiration to the family that are all impacted by disabilities. That hey, resources are out there, helps are all there. Let's don't feel shameful and don't feel guilty about what the situation that we're dealing with. Let's all learn great coping skill, and let's all treat our kids like the way that they deserve to be treated, and teach them the skill that they need to be taught, and hopefully we'll just create a path for integration, for them to the workforce in the future. And I'm really here to learn how to help to increase the diversity in the workforce, because I recently opened up my own small business, and I am not only struggling outreaching to the family that need help, I'm also struggling outreaching to multilingual, therapists, like trying to recruit them, and I don't know where they exist. They don't know I exist. It takes tremendous.
Come in, please.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Do a circle. We're
Yeah,
circle.
A kumbaya, so it's all good.
Yes, kumbaya.
Yeah, how can I support them to have a successful career, fulfill all the 2004 requirements and getting the supervision that they need, and also trying to train more deeply committed, clinician to our field.
Right.
That's
Wonderful.
just
Thank
my
you.
Thank you, Hua. We're just quickly, for those who just came in, we're just going to quickly say who we are and why we came to this workshop, and then we're going to introduce ourselves as panelists. Oh, I'm not a panelist. No, I know.
That's why you were put on the spot. They always put us on the spot first.
Hello everyone, my name is Kyle Galimba. I'm the outreach manager, or AANHPI outreach manager at NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we recognize the problem of not seeing enough people that look like us, and we know that people are more likely to talk about what's really eating at them if with someone that looks like us. We're around our tribe and things like that. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Audrey. I'm just a high school student. I'm here to learn more about resources and also discuss the stigma around mental health in our culture and talk about ways to overcome it.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm also a high school student, and I just want to add on something Audrey said, where I feel like in our culture, asking for help is kind of gone against, so I really wanted to be here to talk about resources too and all of that.
Hi, I'm Yvonne. I am here because I'm the mother of these two. And also, mental health is such an important foundation for everything. And so I'm excited to learn and talk about how we can support each other in our community.
Wonderful.
My name is Yang Qu, and I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I have been working on research in pharmaceutical science department for field for more than 20 years. Recently, I went back to school for my mental health counseling degree.
Wow, for you. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. So I came here to learn, and hopefully I can help people.
My name is Irene, in Chinese, Zhang Haiyun. I came here, I knew many people in UCA. I also love the focus of mental health. The more important reason is Stephanie and I were best friends since 14.
Oh, wow.
So we want to have another summer camp together after 40 years. without our children and husbands. And we're roommates, by the way. So seriously, with the mental health, I studied neurobiology for my PhD. But during the PhD process, I was already seeing a therapist, which I thought was very normal. Until 20 years later, I had 2 suicide tragedies among my friends. And I realized Chinese Americans are still finding it very difficult, like you guys said, with the stigma of recognizing it, first of all, as not as a flaw, but as a disease, and then seeking help. So I've been doing a lot of advocacy in the Bay Area for the last 10 years. Justin, I think, it's like we knew Justin when he was younger, and now he's more established. Really happy to see that growth, right, of all the wonderful people.
Right.
Thank you. So I think in 2022, 78% of clinical psychologists were white, which is way more than the actual white population. So we know there's still disparities in our workforce. And those of you who were at the plenary this morning heard my joke. It's not a joke because it's real. My parents were horrified when they found out I was going to psychiatry. They were so excited I was a doctor.
Yeah.
And then they said, what? And so my mom sent me those articles about like being murdered by patients, murdering their psychiatrists. My dad, actually, I didn't share this, he would call me a neuropsychiatrist to his friends because that sounded like more medical. And I had to say, you can't do that because neuropsychiatry is a separate field. You have to go like get extra training for. I don't have that. Like that he needed to start with neurology. And actually in Japan, I think they still call them departments of neuropsychiatry. It's not psychiatry alone. So you can see that stigma is built in and the idea that anything in the mind is somehow crazy. But as long as it's physical, then it's fine. So I think we're here to, as, who said that this morning? It was Tenley, or someone said that the head is a part of the body, right?
Yes,
Somehow we need
right.
to get over this, and actually half the symptoms of depression are physical. So we know there is a connection here, and all of these careers, we're bringing multiple perspectives to bear on these illnesses, right? Because it's not just genes, it's not just medication, it's also the way we think and behave. And it's also social structures, so that's the biopsychosocial approach. So I'm thrilled that we actually have all those perspectives represented on this panel. We have a psychiatrist, a social worker, and a clinical psychologist. And I've asked each of them to share a little bit about their personal journey to kind of, both their personal background that they'd like to share, and then, kind of what led them to pursue this career, and maybe help us to understand, maybe in the next round, a little bit about what it takes to become that specialty. So let me start with Dr. Taylor Desir.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here. So my name is Monica Taylor Desir, and much like Justin, even in my own culture, when I said, I think I'm going to be a psychiatrist, and I was in high school, my family was like, you want to be a real doctor. You don't want to be a psychiatrist because psychiatrists aren't real doctors. No, they're very much real doctors. So I grew up liking science. I did science fair and really thought, okay, well, I'll go into psychology. And doctors they just prescribe medicine for mental health, but I'm going to do more of the therapy. And 2 of my mentors growing up were Black women pediatricians, and I did not know that was not normal. I mean, they look like me, they were encouraging me to become a physician. So again, that was very helpful. And then I did more science fair and said, okay, I'm gonna do the science route. So one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit is, there are the influences that you know about, and sometimes the things that you don't know about. So as I was growing up, my grandfather had Alzheimer's disease and lived in a small rural town. So some of my early memories were of driving long distances to see him in the hospital, because at that time they did not know what to do with Alzheimer's disease. So he was in a state hospital, and so that was in my mind about underserved communities before I could really articulate that. So I think one thing is sort of seeing people that were physicians, seeing Black women that were physicians. But I will tell you, there was nobody that was a Black woman psychiatrist. That's what was going on. And some of the things that I did were, you start to read books. You read books of people who were doing the things you want to do. And one of the things that I wanted to share, is it okay to share this one?
Of course.
Okay.
Oh,
Bear with
great.
me. One thing, is sometimes you want to do things and you don't know of people who've already gone down that route. And I wanted to share this slide from the American Psychiatric Association. We have a library exhibit that is available online on Asian American psychiatrists, trailblazers, past, present, and future. And there are about 44 profiles of Asian American psychiatrists, and I went through, and at least 11 are Chinese psychiatrists. And I think it's really a great resource. If you are thinking about how do I get there, see some of the historical folks. And some people, or some of my colleagues, that I swear if you reach out through LinkedIn, they will most likely answer you and be ready to help and provide any advice about a career path. So after that, went to college. I would say I'm probably middle class, grew up middle class, upper middle class, but that doesn't mean my parents had money for everything. So we had loans for college, and then medical school, you're going to do homework. And so one of the resources is National Health Service Corps. And so they paid for medical school's government program. So they pay for medical school, and they give you a stipend, and they pay for some books, and then you owe the government 4 years of service. Some people thought that's awful. And I'm like, you can do anything for 4 years. So I ended up going to a Winslow Indian Healthcare Center, and that's where I started working with Native American population. And it was a wonderful experience. But there are times where, and it won't take too long, but where you're the first one or you're the only, and I don't know if all of you heard Sue Ving talk today.
Yeah. Yes.
I loved when she said, when you're number one, you think differently. But just to hear her talk about being the only one and just moving forward. So even as I did my service in the American Indian community, learned so much. And but there weren't many people that looked like me. So I use that as a resource, and then also as you become a professional, entering into your professional society. So I'm going to stop there and pass my love.
I share a lot of experience in a different perspective. So I'm Kate. I am coming from Shenzhen, China in the 80s, end of the 80s while the economy took place. I was actually, looking back, there were alcoholism, and my dad passed away when I was 9. But I mean, the Chinese way, just go inclusive for everything and just go with the flow. Then we learned English. Then I went to a banking business after graduation. Everything is just the way it is. Then my husband decided to come to the U.S. and was dependent of an international student. And by itself, it's diagnosis. Because you got nothing to do. You got 2 years. You're not allowed to go to school. You're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to do anything.
Didn't know that.
Yes.
It's a visa.
Yes.
That you can't do.
So I got a whole 2 years to think about what to do. So I was in St. Louis, and WashU has a free, not really free. I mean, everybody got scholarship to go to social work school, and mental health is definitely the things that I want. So I actually have a best friend who is also a psychologist. So she said, you obviously belong to the helping profession. And I'm kind of, I cannot start a PhD program. So I went to the social work school, and then moved to here in 2007 because my husband got a job here. And I got my license in social work, and my first job is actually in DC child welfare. So I got 2 years in the child welfare business. I feel the same thing. I'm the only Asian American social worker in child welfare field. And but I always tell, I have 7 kids, eight kids in my caseload. They're my kids. I don't see them differently. They are all African American, and also the agency I work with is 99% African American. But I truly don't. I am the excellence colleague, right? I voted the excellent colleague. So I don't see the difference by skin. I don't see the culture. I mean, we are mostly identical. So I actually move on. I don't tell the story why I have to leave the field because I also have my second child on the spectrum. So I move on to the government, county government, to work for 2 years. And what scared me out is that I saw my colleagues. I was handing out checks to people who lost their home. All I do is just handing out assessment, handing out check, and trying to see what can help them to manage their finance better. But then I see people coming back. So I don't feel that I'm helping that much. And then I see my colleagues, they all have a certificate hang out in their cubicle. Thank you for your 20 years service, 20 for your 30 years, 50 years. So I said, I want to do something else. And then my colleagues give me a small piece of paper saying Chinese Culture and Community Service is finding out a social worker. They never have a social worker in the past 30-some years before I joined. It's a community service center, but no social worker ever served. And no social worker come in for a long time after me too. So, but I mean, I become I don't know why, I become the clinical manager, clinical director for the safety net clinic. And it was a very sporadic practice at the beginning. One afternoon coexist with another clinic. So it started from there when I joined. But because I'm a social worker, so I see things differently. I see people wellness is not just medical. So first I bring in the hepatitis B program. We screen and vaccinate and treat hepatitis B. And it was pretty successful. The funder love to fund a course like that because Asia never asked for anything. And hepatitis B, it's medical. And it's easy to ask for money. And then in 2015, we also have 3 psychiatrists, private practice, primary care doctors. They were part of the volunteer team, and they said, let's just do something mental health, just tell people mental health. Because in their practice, they see a lot of people have a lot of physical symptoms like anxiety attack and all kinds of somatic symptoms. And they feel that they are wasting time and energy and the public money to treat that. So we form a group, Mental Health 360, and we start to give talk and start to see patients. We get on the insurance board, we get grants so that we start to have programs. And we also start with what we see. I also have my mother on Alzheimer's, so we have this caregiver support. So that's the thing on.
Thank you. Yeah, and I resonate so much with your story. I feel like there's a piece of me that's in every one of you, and vice versa. Yeah, so I grew up in Shanghai, and like Kai-Yun was saying, like we met each other at age 14, and we have been best friends since then. Never in the same school, but we somehow grow together because of our shared interest. I think in human, fundamentally, right? It's that very fundamental humanistic kind of an interest. And so I was sharing, like what led me to become a clinical psychologist. And I'm so glad we have some young children, kids here, not children, but yeah, young people who are aspiring, right, towards this area. So for me, like I was in high school in kind of the 80s, right? And at that time, there was a lot of Western philosophy that was just flooding into the Chinese, kind of opening the door. And Hai-Yun and I, we used to mail each other the kind of, was through philosophy books, and we would write on the edges, kind of our thoughts, right? That's how we communicated. We mail each other the books. It takes a week. Yeah. It's a different time. Yeah. But one of the books I read that really shaped me, impacted me, was by Abraham Maslow on the hierarchical need of a human being. And growing up in China, which so much about it is emphasizing group conformity, right? And since I was a kid, like my teacher would write, on the school report, like the only thing you need to improve on is to be modest, right? And so I think just the idea of self-actualization, right? That just really, I echoed with it deeply. That I felt like growing up in that group conformity, there was this individuality that wanted to shout out and say, here is me, I'm unique, I'm different, and I don't care, right? And so I think that's what motivated me to study psychology. And you talked about your grandfather, your mom. For me, kind of what brought to my memory is like my grandfather, when I was born, in 1968, midst of Cultural Revolution, my grandfather was in jail, right? So, but he survived, and so I always wondered and he was in individual isolation in a private dark room, a cell by himself, but he survived. So I was always curious, what's the resilience, right? Like that enabled him to survive. What's a human spirit? And so those are the drivers that led me to choose psychology as a major. And at that time in China, there were only 4 undergrad kind of programs for psych majors, because during Cultural Revolution, psychology was denounced as a pseudoscience. So all the psych departments got closed down. So for like a decade, we didn't train any psychologists, really. Yeah. And so I was lucky. I was sent to, in my junior year, to America, to Minnesota, as an international exchange student. And I continued to pursue psychology. Long story short, I got my PhD in clinical psych from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And I knew exactly what you're talking about, Monica, right? Like throughout my pursuit of my dream to become a clinical psychologist, I was the only Asian American or minority. Like I went to, the program at Madison, Wisconsin was top ranked in the whole country, right? Like Maslow actually taught there. Carl Rogers taught there, right? Like I ate lunch under their photos. But I was probably the only minority graduate student, PhD candidate ever in the program. Yeah. And so after I got my PhD, my dream was to be a professor with a clinical practice on the side. But I was looking at the professional journal, and I saw an ad by a psychologist consulting firm. And I never thought, being a clinical psychologist, I could apply what I learned into business. So I applied and was lucky enough to be hired. And so then that took my career onto a totally different direction. So then for the past 20-some years, I applied psychology in business. So first, working as a consultant with companies, with like C-suite executives, leadership assessment, leadership coaching. And then I came internal and worked for several large global companies like Bank of America, HP, and most recently with with Microsoft. Too many M's. Yeah. So I didn't work for Motorola, but yeah. So for the past 7 years, I was at Microsoft as the director of global learning and development, and as a director of global executive development. However, kind of coming into like the second half of my life, right? I had an opportunity to just press pause and really think about how do I truly make a meaningful impact, and looking at the mental health crisis, especially among Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, right? And my own children also had mental illness when they were in high school, and finding a therapist, especially somebody who looks like us, even we were in Seattle, right, on the West Coast, that was impossible. So that's what motivated me to leave Microsoft and start my own private practice. So I'm coming back to my roots as a clinical psychologist, and I've seen patients and I'm doing leadership coaching.
Thank you so much for sharing these stories. And I think the next question we wanted to know a little more about kind of what is a psychiatrist? What is a social worker? What's a psychologist? What's the difference? And kind of what kind of schooling and training did you have to go through? And if you could also say just a little bit about what you actually do on a day-to-day basis.
So I am a community psychiatrist. So I am a medical doctor. So I did 4 years of college and then 4 years of medical school, and residency for psychiatry, just to be a general psychiatrist, is 4 years. For my particular path, when I say I'm a community psychiatrist, that means I did some extra training in community psychiatry. So I did a fellowship for 2 years that overlapped, so that my 4th year of residency overlapped with my 1st year of fellowship. And I also got my master's in public health. So when I say community psychiatry, I really say that means I'm working with systems. So that means family systems, school systems, court systems, government systems. In my day-to-day practice, I am a psychiatrist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I do assertive community treatment. So that means that I go into people's homes who have severe mental illness and provide care for them in their home, or if they don't want to meet in their home, in a community setting. So I've been at homes, I've been in my car, and that person's been in their car, especially during COVID. I've met people in the park. I've met people in parking lots. And yeah, sometimes it's beautiful, because I say I have the best job, because sometimes my office is sitting outside with a mom who just had a baby, who has schizophrenia, and she's out on her farm, and that's beautiful in the summer in Minnesota. But sometimes it's also talking to people in 20-degree weather outside of their trailer park. And it's cold, but I still love my job. So that's what I do as a community psychiatrist. I also am the associate program director for our training program, so I'm helping to develop leadership skills and develop young psychiatrists. And I also do some research. That's what I do.
Yes, so a social worker, I went to master of social work program, and then had 2 years in the field, get supervision and get my credit, and then I took another test to get my clinical license. So that's what it takes. And my daily job now, I do I spend a lot more time on administration, trying to get grants to sustain programs. I try to train actually. I'm a field instructor for GW, George Washington School, UMD's School of Social Work. So I take students, and now I'm so happy. I have almost 1 or 2 every year interns in the field, and I just took them to do programs. So the programs we do. Step back a little bit. I work for the Chinese Culture and Community Service Center. It's a little bit north, like about 20 miles from here, and so every year we see about at least 5,000 community people with no insurance and low income, but they do need to see a doctor. So that's the client base we have. But we do have a kind of, we've been there for so long, so people in this area, DMV, Chinese people, they know about us, so they reach out for service. So again, I develop program. I do set aside time to see patients. because many of them, we get referral from the nurse. We do have an adult daycare center, and the nurse just tell us, oh, this senior just talked to them. And we do an intake, and we know. And there's a lot of issue with the senior, a lot of the unresolved problem, long, deep-rooted problem in their life. So we deal with that, but then we also deal with the outside community, because insurance also refer patient in. So we also do some non-durable service. Like during COVID, we have a PEARL program. It's called Program to Encourage Active and Reward Life. So this is an evidence-based program to reach out to the depressed and isolated senior. So the intern I mentioned, they get trained, and then they just, we went to a community center to reach out and screen the senior. And there's some trick to if you just set up a mental health booth, nobody would come. You can imagine. So they will do vital sign, a glucose check, and a benefit enrollment, right? They have to enroll in Medicaid. And then there's a mental health booth, and we ask how you feel, and then at the end they can get some snacks, and they have to get all the stamp before they can get so they can just talk to them, how do you feel? And people actually open up when it's not that intimidating setting. So so that we get some name, and we tell them, do you want me to call you next week? Then we can call you the next 4 months. We have about 6 to 8 section and call, and we set up goal, and we talk about the obstacle, and we talk about the action plan, and we keep track of the PHQ and GAD, and we collect data like that. So also a recent case would be, especially our clinic patient, and he had a car accident, and he's sent to a skilled nursing facility. He had no family member, and we just happened. My staff just called to verify the insurance, and he said, "I want to die in this skilled nursing. There's no hope. I mean, what's the point living on?" So, so we just like put him on the watch, the program to be on the watch, and then we shared our lunch. I mean, the Chinese center have lunch, and we just shared the lunch box with him, and he was like, "I haven't get a Chinese lunchbox for months," and like we can only share 1 or 2 each week, and he said that's the thing he looked forward to in life. So we are really doing some on the ground thing, and also I do it purposely with the intern, is that they get to see what is the environment in a skilled nursing, and that's the population we deal with.
Thank you. Yeah, so my training was in clinical psychology, right? So for a PhD in clinical psychology program, we call it, it's a scientist practitioner model. So you're trained both as a scientist and as a practitioner. So it takes a long time. So like for me, the first 3 years was very heavy on the scientist part, the research, right, the academic studies. And then the clinical kind of training starts to kick in and increasing. And then you have to take a preliminary exam to qualify as a doctoral candidate. And that usually happens at like year 3, year 4. That was like, I said, I think my classmates would have agreed with me. Like, I never studied that hard. And once you finish, if you're qualified as a candidate, then you do your research, right? And then you defend your dissertation, etc. But you need also do a 1-year pre-doctoral clinical internship. So I did it. I did 1 year in a state mental hospital. Yeah. And so you have all these before you can kind of graduate and get a degree, get a PhD in clinical psychology. And typically it takes probably 6 to 7 years. I know like at Madison, Wisconsin, because people can take forever to get a PhD, so the university set a limit. Like you have to be done by like year 9 or year 11, something like that. Yeah, But the research I did was fascinating, was really interesting. And I think it prepared me to, after graduate school, to kind of step into something that's so cross-disciplinary. Because for my master's, I studied schizophrenia. And that's when my advisor sent me to go to, like the halfway houses, right? To really hang out with schizophrenic patients, right? And just shadow, talk with them. I walked in the parks with them, right? Like we became friends, right? And then for my doctorate, my study focused on substance abuse and motivation for drug addiction and treatment. And specifically, at that time, there was just a national push, right, in terms of nicotine addiction treatment, smoking cessation. So my research center was very multidisciplinary. I had a PhD advisor and an MD advisor, and we had nutritionists, we had a geneticist, right, clinical psychologists, and we were in the medical school, and I did bedside consultation in like the cardiac ICU with patients, right, on smoking cessation. And I did a research project for the FDA that kind of provided the research backing to set up the policy to ban smoking in the cockpit. Because at that time, they banned smoking in the passenger cabin, but the pilots couldn't smoke. And because they were concerned if the pilots were deprived of nicotine, it could, affect their safety, performance, right? So I did a research in terms of, how would a nicotine withdrawal impact cognitive functioning and safety. And then we also did the multi-site, double-blind clinical trial studies on nicotine replacement treatments like nicotine gum, nicotine patch with the pharmaceutical companies. But because we had psychologists on the team, we wanted to insert clinical trial on the effectiveness of therapy, of psychotherapy. So we did kind of the double-blind clinical trial study on group therapy, and we provided clinical evidence that psychotherapy, group therapy significantly increased efficacy for smoking cessation. So FDA has to put a label to all the nicotine replacement therapy, saying, to increase your effectiveness in quitting, you're encouraged to participate in clinical trial studies. And I was one of the ghostwriters of Surgeon General's report on the guideline for smoking cessation treatment. So I was really on this path to be like an academic something. But talk about like what I did in my professional career, right? So to get a license in Illinois as a clinical psychologist, it also required 1 year postdoctoral supervised experience. And because I joined the psychologist consulting firm, and because we kind of worked with American Psychological Association through lobbying. So I was fortunate I could fulfill my requirement for the 1 year postdoctoral clinical training in that psychologist consulting firm. And then as a psychologist in the business world, right, I did a lot of executive leadership assessments, right? So we actually use a lot of the clinical training in terms of observation, questioning, active listening, right? And combine it with, business, leadership, kind of the field of theories and thinking. And we also do personality assessments, kind of, cognitive, assessments, all these combined together. So lots of executive leadership assessments, and then leadership coaching. And executive coaching, right, use a lot of the clinical training. The skills are really relevant in terms of how do you really help the person to gain insight about themselves, how to initiate behavioral change and sustain change. So when I went internal to like Bank of America, Microsoft, right, that's why like being a psychologist, I led kind of the work in terms of how do we build the portfolio of leadership assessment offerings, right? What do we provide in terms of helping like broad employee base versus mid-level versus senior executives in terms of leadership assessment and leadership coaching to help them to grow and to build the pipeline of talent. Yeah, and now kind of back into clinical practice, right? I'm seeing patients, I'm doing a lot of advocacy, kind of pro bono, right? Just building awareness, reduce stigma. Oh, another thing I did at Microsoft that's interesting. So I was on the mental health task force at Microsoft. And kind of part of that work made me have an increased awareness of the need for mental health support, right? Just across the population. Yeah, so my patients right now, interestingly, right, are mostly, I would say, Chinese Americans across from high school to, kind of people like my age, right? And they're dealing with different challenges in life, anxiety, depression, relationship challenges, right, loss, etc. Yeah. So back to you, Justin.
Yeah, no, you can definitely hear from these three professionals. There's so many different pathways within mental health, and that's one of the things I love about it. You can change, you changed careers midway, kind of, right? You were doing more leadership development coaching and then switched to private practice, direct therapy. Kate, you also described changes, you could go in many directions, put it that way. I have more questions, but I also want to make sure that if any of you all have questions, feel free to raise your hands. I'm happy to share the mic.
Yeah, talk about changing directions.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because I remember when I was taking like a child assessment course, right? We spent a lot of time on getting trained on how do you do assessment in the right way. But the professor, Dr. Moffitt, she said she was convinced anybody who wants to get a PhD in clinical psych are people who likes to keep their options open because you have so many different paths you can go.
But if there are no questions yet, feel free to think about it. But I think one reason many people are probably here is they're curious about kind of therapy and mental health. What is therapy and why is it different for Asians? Like, why do we need more Chinese therapists? What have you noticed when working with these clients? Is it just because you can speak the language? Are there some cultural aspects that make it, that if you saw a person not from the Chinese background, it will be harder to get better? What do you think? And sorry, Monica, you could also apply this to any minority group, I guess, right?
I guess I'm starting first. I think definitely when I talk about doing cross-cultural therapy, we really think about, that is when I'm training folks about having cultural humility and learning about a person's culture and not generalizing. So I think I was speaking before, I used to work with tribal communities, and there's over 560 native sovereign nations, and people will say, well, how do you work with an American Indian? And I'm like, from which tribe? Right. Because, and I think even if, so when I was in training, a lot of times this happens, if you're the only one or one of the few, then they want to give all the patients to you that look like you. And I would say, just because I'm a Black woman doesn't mean I have the same experience as this older Black woman who's come into therapy. So I think there's a lot about our therapists learning about cultural humility. And is it Irene? Mm-hmm. And I would love to hear if you would share with us about your own experience. You said you were in therapy.
Oh, yeah.
And you thought it was normal. And before I hand over the mic, a lot of times as psychiatrists, you do your own work. Mm-hmm. And I went into therapy, and because of the stigma of mental health in my own community, they were like, oh, I'm sure you'd like to have a Black woman next psychiatrist. And I was like, no. And
same here.
You know why? I was like, because they'll think that I'm really crazy. Because that would be the internal stigma in my community. And I did not want this person that I didn't know, who was a Black psychiatrist, that looked like me, to think that I was not really had good mental health. Even, we do this for our health. Yeah. Like if you're working out to get stronger. So if you would share.
Sure. let me rephrase what I understand you want me to share, which is, do I think that when I seek the therapist, yes, whether I choose to have the people who look like me or not, yeah. So when I was 20, I was a graduate student at Caltech. I was just having some trouble with my advisor because I never had done research before, and he'd never really had graduate students. He was 33. So I was looking more and more avoiding the lab that I was supposed to do. So a postdoc who was actually Indian descent, she was going through divorce. She said, oh, you don't look that happy, which is why you guys were talking about reaching out or just asking, are you okay? She said, maybe you want to see my therapist. So my therapist, first time, happened to be a white woman. So I actually had the same feeling as you do, because recently I looked for another therapist in the Bay Area. I actually don't want to have Asian women. And the reason was kind of funny because I knew many as people, as friends. So that's why I don't go to Stephanie anymore. I don't, yeah, for free. I don't want to pay her, and it's just different. So I actually get it free from lots of my friends. And when I want a more formal therapy, I actually want someone, this guy is a white male. But I want to say that my experience was more different than most Chinese because my English was okay. And I was able to express my feeling in English actually better than Chinese. In China, we had this conformity thing, which is always, my husband always say, 快乐童年, which Chinese, it just means you're very happy, and you're supposed to be happy. So there are not many emotional words that you want to differentiate emotions. So it's easier for me to express in English. It's just the same as it's easier for me to yell at my kids in English. I know exactly what they did, you know. It's hard to do in Chinese. So for me, I actually love a more, a better English environment. But as I was doing lots of advocacy, especially with Elaine, hello Elaine, I was just gonna talk about you. I realized the difficulty for many people in language. That's why I so appreciate her also providing the interpretation service here. I didn't realize the importance until I worked with many other Chinese in the Bay Area where it's sort of a double-edged sword. The more population density we have who's ethnically of one group, the less English they have to speak. And then the more, in a way, incompetent they're able to, when they speak in English about therapy. So it's the other way around in the Bay Area, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and so I mentioned like my kids both looked for needed therapists when they were in high school, right? And I thought, I'm a clinical psychologist, right? And I should have, there's like autoimmunity, right? But that's not true, right? That's absolutely not true. Doctors get sick too. Doctors' families get sick. Yeah, and so I told them, like, look for therapists online, right? You look for it, right? And I found like my older one didn't really care, but my younger one absolutely wanted to look for somebody who is Asian. Oh, wow. Yeah, so I think there are individual differences in preference, right? And for me, like in my practice, clinical practice, what I have seen is, like clearly for my clients who kind of grew up in China, they prefer to communicate in Chinese, right? And so I have the same challenge. Often I have to, because I learned most of psychology in America, and I also find that it's easier to use English words to describe, differentiate different emotions. I have a bigger vocabulary, than in Mandarin, so I often have to kind of do bilingual at the same time. I will say it, I'll say compassion, for example. And I'm like, I think the Chinese word for it is this, and no, it's this, yeah. And so I find clearly for my clients who grew up in China, right, using Mandarin is so much better for them because with the language, what connects to them is the context of their life, where they grew up, their memory. It's all in one network, right? And then for the younger kids, like I have high school students, ABC, right? But when they describe their family environment, sometimes when they talk about what their parents kind of say to them, they would, give phrases in Chinese, right? And so to have that language, right, helps to just have a shared common understanding. And my cousin, who is in Canada, she has been seeing a therapist, and non-Chinese, right? And she said, her therapist is great, but she finds herself often have to kind of, tell and retell the cultural context again and again. And, that is a little bit frustrating. She appreciates her therapist ask her and be curious, right? But then she feels like she's educating the therapist. Yeah. And then also in terms of research, there is a classic kind of a study comparing different psychotherapy approaches, right? And look at its efficacy, its outcome. And the key tenet from that study is that, what makes the most difference, regardless of the therapeutic approach, right? Whether it's psychoanalysis or CBT, or client-centered, etc. It's a client-patient relationship. So regardless of skin color or anything, it's the relationship between therapist and client. Yeah, it's the trust, right? And so working because for me, I love variety, and I was talking to Jaime last night about this, right? I don't want to be restricted to only seeing Chinese American clients either, right? And so for me, it's regardless of skin color, it's that client-patient relationship that makes a difference.
Yes. I think we all share the same theme. I also mentioned earlier I work in an all African American agency. I don't see the color different when you work with them, you see the true person, you don't see them. So in my practice too, I would say most of my clients are actually Chinese speaking because that's the only way they can express themselves. But I do have a lot of Hispanic speaking patients only speak Hispanic. It doesn't really matter. And also a lot of the time I think the therapist's role is actually first of all create a safe environment, open and safe environment for them to process. They know the answer. They are the one who know the solution where they are. But having a place they feel safe, they feel they can open up, they can say anything, that's what they needed. It doesn't matter with the culture, the language. The openness is important. Another thing I also always give this metaphor that I'm kind of like a tour guide for this life journey. I'm in my 50s. I give it out. So I've been through a lot of the things. It's just like a tour guide. I'll tell you, oh, there's a big pool, part of water there, but you can just take a run. It's gonna be okay. And you see a mountain, but it's not that bad. Just I will chew you up a little bit, and you pass it. I'll see you on the other end. So it's that kind of support. So eventually, everybody have to walk on their own path. And I always tell them I don't have a magic way. I don't have magic to play. I don't know better than you. I'm a human being. I make mistakes, right? But then we know that we all can get through this. And a lot of the challenge in different life span, different stage is pretty much the same. It's just in a different way. So giving them a roadmap, giving them that confidence, that actually make a lot of difference.
Yes.
So beautifully said.
Yeah.
In my own experience as a clinician with East versus West, one of the biggest cultural barriers is around kind of individualism versus collectivism that we talked about. And I think that's sort of the cultural humility piece of it. A lot of Western therapists do pursue a very individualistic approach, which is important. But for example, I had a patient who was gay, and he actually ended therapy with several white therapists who basically were like, you just need to come out to your parents. And for him, it was like, that's very disrespectful, right? Like he might eventually get there, but the lack of awareness that that is not as simple as it might sound actually was really important and actually ended several therapies, right? So I think this stuff is complicated, and it's important for the therapist to be humble and to not assume that they have the right answer. We don't know anyone's life. So I loved you all spoke so beautifully about kind of the work I wanted to follow up about kind of, we heard this morning someone asked a question, I want my parents to go to therapy, but I don't know how. What would you say to some, this community is just starting to have this conversation, like you were ahead of the game to go as a 20-year-old. Yeah, that sounds like it. And you went to see a therapist, thought there was nothing, no problem, but you can see even today, a lot of people would see a problem. So what would you as community members, but also clinicians from the community say to someone who's still thinking, gosh, it would be weird, or I worry people are going to talk about me?
Yeah, I heard that question this morning. I was in that session and, I was really thinking, wow, how could you get your parents to go to therapy? Like, how do you get my parents to go to therapy? But, I was thinking about that and just thinking, like, what provided strength to your parents? Because, we have mental health, whether we talked about it or not. Mm-hmm. There was something that promoted mental health, whether we talked about it or not. So I don't know if it's the right answer to say, oh, you got to go to therapy, but is there a way to approach that in a culturally responsive and appropriate way so that that's a person speaking from outside the community?
Yes, we do have clients like that. Nowadays people. So when we bring mental health to the community, it's always about the kids, high schooler. And parents, nothing wrong with me, I've been through all this. So they just drop off their kids, they wait in the car. So we always say, okay, I just tell the parent first, I'll just talk to the child, and then in the number 4 section, you need to come in. We all need to sit down and then talk about the things. It's super powerful when they all sit together. Mm-hmm. The things that they feel that they cannot, there's no solution, and then when they sit together and with a moderation, right, they'll be able to let the word out. It actually reminds me one event that we put out in the Hear Me Out. We have a mental health article competition in 2016. You were there. Mm-hmm. And then the next session we have is Hear Me Out. So we have the children, American born, to write something to their parents, to their first generation parent. And the parent can write something to the children too.
You're so familiar. We were panelists together.
Yes, yes, and it was very powerful. So at the end, we have them all come together, just read that letter to each other, and it just gained a different perspective. Yeah, so it's just nothing mysterious about mental health. It's just part of life, part of health, right? But it just attached too much stigma to it.
Yeah, so for me, like high school students, I don't see younger ones because I don't feel like I'm particularly trained, right, with younger population. But with high school students, I kind of see it as a requirement, just like how you set it up, right? It's like for the kids, and then, but, right, like the last 10 minutes of the session, the parents come in, right? So we facilitate the conversation between them. And then with like my college student kind of clients, right? Like for the Chinese parents, right? I give them free time basically. Like I talk with them on the phone, and they would share their anxiety. They would ask for tips, advice, right? And I spend a lot of time with them on the phone, right? Kind of informally. And then I do, do webinars and things, right? Just kind of pro bono, because I feel like there's so much work that needs to be done to reduce the stigma first. And in those webinars, I try to give parents really kind of concrete kind of materials that they can work with. It's not like promoting the service, but it's really about giving them things they can take away, they can use, right? I think we have to start with that mindset. Yeah, we have to just build the awareness in the community first, reduce the stigma.
Mm-hmm. We're in the last minute or so, but any questions for the panel?
Hi, thank you, and thank you for bringing up the topic of parents and how to get them in there and get them talking. I tried to talk to my mom about it once. She, I guess, like the term is like parentalizing the children. I tried to come at her with my problems, and she's like, "Oh, I have this, this, and that. We got family in the Philippines that's going on, whatever." And I asked her, I was like, "Would you like to talk to someone?" And her immediate reaction was, "We don't do that." And I never heard her I don't know who we is. So,
Earth person.
yeah, so I just wanted your reaction on that based on the topic, and it's been spewing in my mind for a couple of years, so just wondering your reaction to that.
I just want to tell a couple stories about mother, how to get them to see therapists. It's about my mother-in-law. I was doing a lot of advocacy, so I was giving lectures with Elaine and other people about my own experience as well as just encouraging people. And I just spread them on WeChat, and gradually my parents and my in-laws do not see me as someone, why do all of a sudden you start doing this? So they accept it already. And then it's about you doing it yourself. So I always encourage the parents who ask me the other way around, how can I get my children to see therapists? I said, have you considered yourself? Because it only takes yourself to change yourself, because you cannot change another person. The first thing you have to start is changing yourself. So my mother-in-law, after all these years of, encouragement, she one day told me, I went to see a psychologist in Shanghai, because I know she was anxious sometimes, but she volunteered. I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. So it will happen, and it's about you leading the example. And so I always happily tell people, I went to see a therapist with my husband 2 weeks ago, I was telling you. So it becomes something like, I equate it to a mental massage. You see, you do a facial, you do a pedicure, massage, and you do a mental massage, like you see a therapist.
And we get paid about that.
Exactly. And the second thing is, it's about actually self-care, like being luxurious to yourself. When I was at Caltech, I never bought any 奢侈品, what do you call it? Luxury goods, except the $20 I spend every week to the therapist, which is a huge chunk for graduate students' stipend. So I knew I did buy luxury goods, which is mental health.
I want to add very quickly, it's that actually we are, in the clinic we do health and mental health. So like I said, the program was started by primary care doctors.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of good primary care doctors, they
Yeah.
do care.
Yeah.
So I actually have a client talk to me, my doctor's really good, tell me, it's not about your health, it's not about the heart gonna stop. It's about you just live your life to like high stress.
Yeah.
So it's also a very big area that bring people into treatment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? Because a lot of times I think talking about sleeping actually is a really good starting point,
That's right.
right? Because the experience, sleeping disturbance, right? And it could be depression, could be anxiety, right? And so, but they are more comfortable talking about something that's a physical symptom.
Yeah.
All right, so we're at time, but please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you for being here.
And because I'm in the area, so I'm gonna leave some name tag outside. And if you next time you come to UCA meeting, you want to see a Chinese agency in operation. Yeah, so yes, I'm happy to bring you in.
And thank you, Irene, volunteering.
I was concerned myself, and I didn't know.